Welcome back to Shiz and Yank. Today we're going to do something a little different. I've read this story online, and it's a good little short horror story called "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream" by Harlan Ellison. It's a very old story.
How old?
I think it was just before the Second World War. Yeah, so you've never heard of this, right?
No, not a chance.
Okay, cool.
Not too much. I'm down for a good horror story. Not too much into things beyond that. Like, I'm not going to go sit and watch, like, Paranormal Activity on a Saturday night. You know what I mean?
That's fair. I recently started getting in more into some of these things. I'm going to start it here. And things might seem confusing, but it'll make sense.
Okay.
I have faith in you.
I have no
All right,
faith
so
in me.
without further ado, story, I have no mouth and I must scream. Limp. The body of Gorister hung from the pink pallet, unsupported, hanging high above us in the computer chamber. It did not shiver in the chill, oily breeze that blew eternally through the main cavern. The body hung head down, attached to the underside of the pallet by the sole of its right foot. It had been drained of blood through a precise incision made from ear to ear under the lantern jaw. There was no blood on the reflective surface of the metal floor. When Gorister joined our group and looked up at himself, it was already too late for us to realize that once again, Am had duped us, had its fun. It had been a diversion on the part of the machine. 3 of us had vomited, turning away from one another in a reflex as ancient as the nausea that had produced it. Gorister went white. It was almost as though he had seen a voodoo icon and was afraid of the future. "Oh God," he mumbled and walked away. The 3 of us followed him after a time and found him sitting with his back to one of the smaller chittering banks, his head in his hands. Ellen knelt down beside him and stroked his hair. He didn't move, but his voice came out of his covered face quite clearly. "Why doesn't it just do us in and get it over with? Christ, I don't know how much longer I can go on like this." It was our 109th year in the computer. He was speaking for all of us. So there's a little break here. What do you feel so far?
You were right. I was the confusion on the initial is making sense.
Yeah.
So essentially, they're in the computer. They found a body hanging from
Gorister.
A what?
His name is Gorister. That's one of the characters.
Okay.
Yep.
Wait, so Gorister found the body.
So Gorister walked into the room and 3 other people were in there, and he saw his own body hanging upside down.
Oh, it's like some Inception type. This is like some Tenet type stuff.
So the other 3 thought he was dead. And that's why when he walked in the room, they looked like surprised. And that's why they said, or why he internally said, Am had duped us. You'll learn who Am is, but Am had duped us, had its fun. So something is having its fun.
Yeah. Okay.
So good initial thoughts.
Okay.
You've heard of Ellen now. Ellen walked over to him to comfort him after he'd thrown up. So the next part.
Mustard on the beat. Oh.
Yes.
Sorry, continue.
So this is another name. Some of them are weird names. So Nimdoc.
Okay.
And then this is in parentheses, which was the name the machine had forced him to use because Am amused itself with strange sounds, was hallucinating that there were canned goods in the ice caverns. Gorister and I were very dubious. "It's another shuck," I told them. "Like the goddamn frozen elephant Am sold us. Benny almost went out of his mind over that one. We'll hike all that way and it'll be putrefied or some damn thing. I say forget it. Stay here. I'll have to come up with something pretty soon or we'll die." Benny shrugged. 3 days it had been since we'd last eaten. Worms. Thick. Ropey. Nimdoc was no more certain. He knew there was the chance, but he was getting thin. It couldn't be any worse there than here. Colder, but that didn't matter much. Hot, cold, hail, lava, boils, locusts. It never mattered. The machine, and we had to take it or die. Ellen decided us. "I've got to have something, Ted. Maybe there'll be Bartlett pears or peaches. Please, Ted, let's try it." I gave in easily. What the hell? Mattered not at all. Ellen was grateful, though. She took me twice out of turn. Even that had ceased to matter. And she never came, so why bother? But the machine giggled every time we did it. Loud up there, back there, all around us, he snickered. It snickered. Most of the time I thought of Am as it, without a soul. But the rest of the time, I thought of it as him, in the masculine, the paternal, the patriarchal, for he is a jealous people. Him, it, God as Daddy the deranged. We left on a Thursday. The machine always kept us up to date on the date. The passage of time was important. Not to us, sure as hell, but to him. It. Am. Thursday. Thanks. Nimdoc and Gorister carried Ellen for a while, their hands locked to their own in each other's wrists. A seat. Benny and I walked before and after just to make sure that if anything happened, it would catch one of us and at least Ellen would be safe. Fat chance. Safe? Didn't matter. It was only 100 miles or so to the ice caverns, and the second day when we were lying out under the blistering sun thing, he had materialized. He sent down some mana. Tasted like boiled boar urine. We ate it. On the third day, we passed through a valley of obsolescence, filled with rusting carcasses of ancient computer banks. Am had been as ruthless with its own life as with ours. It was a mark of his personality. It strove for perfection. Whether it was a matter of killing off unproductive elements in his own world-filling bulk or perfecting methods for torturing us. Am was as thorough as those who had invented him, now long since gone to dust, could ever have hoped. There was light flittering down from above, and we realized we must be very near the surface, but we didn't try to crawl up to see. There was virtually nothing out there, and had been nothing that could be considered anything for over 100 years. Only the blasted skin of what had once been the home of billions. Now there were only 5 of us down here inside, alone with Am. I heard Ellen saying frantically, "No, Benny, don't, come on, Benny, don't, please." And then I realized I had been hearing Benny murmuring under his breath for several minutes. He was saying, "I'm gonna get out, I'm gonna get out," over and over. His monkey-like face was crumpled up in an expression of beatific delight and sadness all at the same time. The radiation scars Am had given him during the festival were drawn down into a mass of pink-white puckerings, and his features seemed to work independently of one another. Perhaps Benny was the luckiest of the 5 of us. He had gone stark, staring mad many years before. But even though we could call Am any damned thing we like, could think the foulest thoughts of fused memory banks and corroded base plates, of burnt-out circuits and shattered control bubbles, the machine would not tolerate our trying to escape. Benny leaped away from me as I made a grab for him. He scrambled up the face of a smaller memory cube, tilted on its side, and filled with rotted components. He squatted there for a moment, looking like the chimpanzee Am had intended him to resemble. Then, he leaped high, caught a trailing beam of pitted and corroded metal, and went up it, hand over hand like an animal, till he was on a girdered ledge 20 feet above us. "Oh, Ted, Nimdoc, please help him. Get him down before..." She cut off. Tears began to stand in her eyes. She moved her hands aimlessly. It was too late. None of us wanted to be near him when whatever was going to happen, happened. And besides, we all saw through her concern. When Am had haltered Benny during the machine's utterly irrational, hysterical phase, it was not merely Benny's face the computer had made like a giant ape's. He was big in the privates, and she loved that. She serviced us as a matter of course, but she loved it from him. Oh, Ellen. Pedestal Ellen. Pristine pure Ellen. Oh, Ellen the clean. Scum filth. Gorister slapped her. She slumped down, staring up at a poor, loony Benny, and she cried. It was her big defense, crying. We had gotten used to it 75 years earlier. Gorister kicked her in the side. Then the sound began. It was light, that sound. Half sound and half light. Something that began to glow from Benny's eyes, and pulse within growing loudness. Dim sonorities that grew more gigantic and brighter as the light/sound increased in tempo. It must have been painful, and the pain must have been increasing with the boldness of the light, the rising volume of the sound, for Benny began to mewl like a wounded animal. at first softly. When the light was dim and the sound was muted, then louder as his shoulders hunched together, his back hunched as though he was trying to get away from it. His hands folded across his chest like a chipmunk's, his head tilted to the side, the sad little monkey face pinched in anguish. Then he began to howl as the sound coming from his eyes grew louder, louder and louder. I slapped the sides of my head with my hands, but I couldn't shut it out. It cut through easily. The pain shivered through my flesh like tinfoil on a tooth. And Benny was suddenly pulled straight. On the girder, he stood up, jerked to his feet like a puppet. The light was now pulsing out of his eyes in two great round beams. The sound crawled up and up some incomprehensible scale. And then he fell forward, straight down, and hit the plate steel floor with a crash. He lay there, jerking spastically as the light flowed around and around him, and the sound spiraled up and out of normal range. Then the light beat its way back inside his head. The sound spiraled down, and he was left there, crying piteously. His eyes were too soft, moist pools of pus-like jelly. Am had blinded him. Gorster and Nimdok and myself, we turned away, but not before we caught the look of relief on Ellen's warm, concerned face. End of that part. What are you feeling?
Oh my God.
What do you think is happening?
So, what I'm gathering is it sounds like mankind created an artificially intelligent being, and the being, whether it be the being killed everybody or deaded everybody, or whether like an apocalypse happened and everybody else just kind of died off other than the machine and these 5 people. But it sounds like this is like we're like trending in a dystopian trend of like everybody is deleted other than this machine and these 5 people. But then again, Benny apparently resembles an ape. Mm-hmm. So what I haven't gathered yet, if this is a modification of a person or if this is a creation by the machine. You know what I mean? Like if it's trying to repopulate.
Gotcha, okay.
But it sounds like he is crazy, or it is crazy because it likes to torture these people.
Oh, you mean like Am?
Yeah.
Okay, yep.
Yeah. It sounds like Am was the one that blinded Benny by the light. It sounds like it's somewhat of a, like, Am has these 5 people trapped. Again, I haven't deduced whether they're 5 survivors of an event that happened, or if everybody died and Am is trying to like rebuild rebuild a population, but it doesn't make sense to rebuild a population and like torture the people that you're rebuilding it with. So I don't know. I'm kind of getting a little bit of the high evolutionary from like Guardians of the Galaxy 3 of like having this idea of like a perfect species or like an ultimate rule.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah.
But that's what I'm getting. And it sounds like Benny tried to escape and punished Benny for trying to escape. Look, it sounded like he went off of something he saw. So Am rightfully took the sight away. Yeah. Not rightfully, but whoa, that's not what I meant. But in response to
we know where Isaac's beliefs lay.
Oh my God, that's not what I meant. This is late. Where are the Cutwaters?
Downstairs.
Not true. But no, it sounds like he tried to escape using the sight. So in response to that, Am took sight away.
It's a good observation.
Sounds like Am just wants total control. And these 5 people are trying to escape that control. I think though that the more I'm thinking, like the more the stories come up to this point, it's more of these 5 survived and are trapped by Am.
Sure, yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense to me why.
Like you'd be
torturing them.
You'd be nice to them if it was like a repopulation or something.
Even if it was like extreme rule, like I feel like it'd still be like if you're repopulating. What are you doing if you're repopulating? Right. So like I feel like these are 5 survivors of something, and I feel like what I've gotten so far again is Am was created by mankind. Something happened, whether Am again deleted them or an apocalypse happened, and Am was a survivor along with these 5 people. and now Am wants to be supreme ruler, kind of like a high evolutionary thing, like I said, and torture these people and do not great things.
Sweet, yeah, pretty good. I think what's interesting too is that this, and I might be wrong with the exact timing, but this is very, if it is an artificial intelligence, I think that's pretty insane for how early this was written as a piece. I mean, this is early 1900s.
You know what happens in the story.
Yeah, I've read it.
So like
I won't spoil anything, but your idea of it being like an AI or an artificial intelligence is like pretty interesting. Like if you think if that is true,
I forgot literally when I said that, I forgot the story was made in 1942.
Isn't that pretty crazy?
Which is kind of exactly, because like that's what my first thought was, but because I think it said in the story it was like,
well, they've been in here for over 100 years,
right?
Which in itself is like, you could read it as a passing line, but you're like, these people are over 100 years old.
Well, wasn't it like Einstein that said, "I know not,"
or I think therefore I am?
No, it was like, "I know not what World War III will be fought with, but I know World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones."
Yeah,
kind of like alluding to like, I mean, Einstein was World War II.
Yeah,
kind of alluding to like a super reset. Advancement in technology. So I mean, the idea of us like having this like incredibly capable technology was still around even during World War II.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see where it goes. Let's see where it goes. Sea green lights suffused the cavern where we made camp. Am provided punk and we burned it, sitting huddled around the wan and pathetic fire, telling stories to keep Benny from crying in his permanent night. What does Am mean? Gorrister answered him. We had done the sequence 1,000 times before, but it was Benny's favorite story. At first, it meant Allied Master Computer, and then it meant Adaptive Manipulator, and later on it developed sentience and linked itself up, and they called it an aggressive menace. But by then it was too late, and finally it called itself Am, Emerging Intelligence, and what it means was I am, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Benny drooled a little and snickered. There was the Chinese Am and the Russian Am and the Yankee Am, and he stopped. Benny was beating on the floor plates with a large, hard fist. He was not happy. Gorrister had not started at the beginning. Gorrister began again. The Cold War started and became World War III and just kept going. So this was after World War II. So it's... The story takes place during the Cold War, so obviously in real life then... I think this takes place maybe right after the Cold War or during it, maybe. I'll put something on screen to say what year it actually came out so I don't feel like an idiot.
Understandable.
Gorrister began again. I'll start that sentence over. The Cold War started and became World War III and just kept going. It became a big war, a very complex war, so they needed the computers to handle it. They sank the first shafts and began building Am. There was the Chinese Am and the Russian Am and the Yankee Am, and everything was fine until they had honeycombed the entire planet, adding on this element and that element. But one day Am woke up and knew who he was, and he linked himself and he began feeding on all the killing data until everyone was dead, except for the 5 of us, and Am brought us down here. Benny was smiling sadly. He was also drooling again. Ellen wiped the spittle from the corner of his mouth with the hem of her skirt. Gorrister always tried to tell it a little more succinctly each time, but beyond the bare facts, there was nothing to say. None of us knew why Am had saved 5 people, or why our specific 5, or why he spent all this time tormenting us, or even why he had made us virtually immortal. In the darkness, one of the computer banks began humming. The tone was picked up half a mile away down the cavern by another bank. Then, one by one, each of the elements began to tune itself, and there was a faint chittering as thought raced through the machine. The sound grew, and the lights ran across the faces of the consoles like heat lightning. The sound spiraled up till it sounded like a million metallic insects, angry and menacing. What is it? Ellen cried. There was terror in her voice, and she hadn't become accustomed to it, even now. It's going to be a bad time this time, Nimdok said. He's going to speak, I know it, Gorrister said. Backing up a bit, Gorrister is not the main character we read from. we haven't heard his name yet, but it's
Uh-huh.
Ted, and I'm about to say it. But I think I said something about how Gorster's who we're main as. But anyways, no, Ted, sit down. What if he's got pits out there or something else? We can't see. It's too dark. Gorster said it with resignation. Then we heard, I don't know, something moving towards us in the darkness. Huge, shambling, hairy, moist. It came towards us. We couldn't even see it, but there was the ponderous impression of bulk heaving itself toward us. Great weight was coming at us out of the darkness, and it was more a sense of pressure, of air forcing itself into a limited space, expanding the invisible walls of a sphere. Benny began to whimper. Nimdok's lower lip trembled, and he bit it hard, trying to stop it. Ellen slid across the metal floor to Gorster and huddled into him. There was the smell of matted, wet fur in the cavern. There was a smell of charred wood. There was a smell of dusty velvet. There was a smell of rotting orchards. There was a smell of sour milk. There was the smell of sulfur, rancid butter, of oil slick, of grease, of chalk dust, of human scalps. Am was keying us. He was tickling us. There was the smell of... I heard myself shriek, and the hinges of my jaws ached. I scuttled across the floor, across the cold metal with its endless lines of rivets on my hands and knees, the smell gagging me, filling my head with a thunderous pain that sent me away in horror. I fled like a cockroach across the floor and out into the darkness. That something moving inexorably after me. The others were still back there, gathered around the firelight, laughing, their hysterical choir of insane giggles rising up into the darkness like thick, many-colored wood smoke. I went away quickly and hid. How many hours it may have been, how many days or even years, they never told me. Ellen chided me for sulking, and Nimdok tried to persuade me it had only been a nervous reflex on their part, the laughing. But I knew I wasn't the relief a soldier feels when the bullet hits the man next to him. I knew it wasn't a reflex. They hated me. They were surely against me, and Am could even sense this hatred and made it worse for me because of the depth of their hatred. We had been kept alive, rejuvenated, made to remain constantly at the age we had been when Am had brought us below, and they hated me because I was the youngest and the one Am had affected least of all. I knew, God, how I knew, the bastards, and that dirty Ellen. Benny had been a brilliant theorist, a college professor. Now he's little more than a semi-human, semi-simian. He had been handsome. The machine had ruined that. He had been lucid. The machine had driven him mad. He had been gay, and the machine had given him an organ fit for a horse. Am had done a job on Benny. Gorster had been a worrier. He was a connie, a conscientious objector. He was a peace marcher. He was a planner, a doer, a looker ahead. Am had turned him into a shoulder shrugger, had made him a little dead in his concern. Am had robbed him. Nimdok went off in the darkness by himself for long times. I don't know what it was he did out there. Am never let us know. But whatever it was, Nimdok always came back white, drained of blood, shaken and shaking. Am had hit him hard in a special way, even if we didn't know quite how. And Ellen, that Am had left her alone, had made her more of a than she had already been. All her talk of sweetness and light, all her memories of true love, all the lies she wanted us to believe, that she had been a virgin only twice removed before Am grabbed her and brought her down here with us. No, Am had given her pleasure, even if she said it wasn't nice to do. I am the only one still sane and whole, really. Am had not tampered with my mind, not at all. I only had to suffer what he visited down on us, all the delusions, all the nightmares, the torments. But those scum, all four of them, they were lined and arrayed against me. If I hadn't had to stand them off all the time, be on my guard against them all the time, I might have found it easier to combat Am, at which point it passed and I began crying. Oh Jesus, sweet Jesus, if there ever was a Jesus and if there is a God, please, please let us out of here or kill us. Because at that moment I think I realized completely so that I was able to verbalize it. Am was intent on keeping us in his belly, forever twisting and torturing us, forever. The machine hated us as no sentient creature had ever hated before, and we were helpless. It also became hideously clear. If there was a sweet Jesus and if there was a God, the God was Am. End of that part. We're just over. We're on page 6 of 10.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So I was right. It was an artificial intelligence that was created, and it saved these 5 people and effectively tampered with them. But this Ted guy didn't do anything to him, but somehow managed to mess with excuse me, the 4 others. And now there's like ponds.
Just here.
Yeah, they're just there in Am's belly. Oh my God, that's crazy.
It's pretty dark. Like it's pretty wild. Like, they've been there for 100 years.
Yeah, he's just toying with them. But I'm interested to hear. I don't know if it's going to get said in the story or not, but I'm interested to hear why or if he didn't tamper with Ted.
Do you believe Ted?
What do you mean?
Do you believe he wasn't tampered with?
Oh my God, what if like page 10 is like Ted is like either like in like this like it's like a dream, but not like a.
That's an interesting.
But not like it's like a locked in dream or like you believe you're living it, and then you can't scream because you can't open your mouth.
Fair enough.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. Yeah.
I don't know. Otherwise, that's a good point.
I guess with what you know so far, do you believe?
I think with what I know so far, there's no choice but to believe Ted.
Fair.
You know what I mean? Like I think the part of me like just because it's a horror story and like there's got to be more to it.
Yeah.
I'm expecting a twist at the end. It's a horror story. I'm expecting something.
Yeah.
But I don't know which direction, and I have no choice from what we've read other than to believe what we're reading from Ted's perspective.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I think you'll get a lot of answers pretty soon here. Yeah, let's just keep going. And I wanted to say, too, if anything comes out that's like either a shock or you're like, you want to say something about it, just cut me off and be like,
oh, yeah.
Interject.
I will. I'm just like half the time my mouth's open. It's like,
because it's crazy. All right, so next part. The hurricane hit us with the force of a glacier thundering into the sea. It was a palpable presence. Winds that tore at us, flinging us back the way we had come, down the twisting, computer-lined corridors of the dark way. Ellen screamed as she was lifted and hurled face forward into a screaming shoal of machines, their individual voices strident as bats in flight. She could not even fall. The howling wind kept her aloft, buffeted her, bounced her, tossed her back and down and away from us, out of sight. Suddenly, as she was whirled around a bend in the dark way, her face had been bloody, her eyes closed. None of us could get to her. We clung tenaciously to whatever outcropping we had reached. Benny wedged in between 2 great crackle-finished cabinets. Nimdoc, with fingers clawed, formed over a railing circling a catwalk 40 feet above us. Gorrister plastered upside down against a wall niche formed by 2 great machines with glass-faced dials that swung back and forth between red and yellow lines whose meanings we could not even fathom. Sliding across the deck plates, the tips of my fingers had been ripped away. I was trembling, shuddering, rocking as the wind beat at me, whipped at me, screamed down out of nowhere at me, and pulled me free from one silver-thin opening in the plates to the next. My mind was a roiling, tinkling, chittering softness of brain parts that expanded and contracted in a quivering frenzy. The wind was the scream of a great mad bird as it flapped its immense wings. And then we were all lifted and hurled away from there, down back the way we had come, around a bend into a dark way we had never explored, over terrain that was ruined and filled with broken glass and rotting cables and rusted metal, and far away, farther than any of us had ever been. Trailing along miles behind Ellen, I could see her every now and then, crashing into metal walls and surging on, with all of us screaming in the freezing, thunderous hurricane wind that would never end. And then suddenly it stopped and we fell. We had been in flight for an endless time. I thought it might have been weeks. We fell and hit, and I went through red and gray and black and heard myself moaning, not dead. That's the end of another part, but that one's pretty much they just were flying through a hurricane and being thrown around for what he feels was weeks.
And so they're like down somewhere, right? Like it sounds like they're in a bunker kind of thing.
From what you can gather,
from what we gathered from the story.
Remember, Benny looked up and he saw light.
Right. So then, like what I gather is like a bunker of some sort. So they had this they're flying like in the bunker. There's a hurricane.
There's a hurricane from a great mad bird. Yeah, in the bunker.
Oh my God. Okay.
And they are being thrown around in and out of consciousness against walls for weeks. That's all we can say about that. Really, it's just pretty horrible.
Yeah.
Am went into my mind. He walked smoothly here and there and looked with interest at all the pockmarks he had created in 109 years. He looked at the cross-routed and reconnected synapses and all the tissue damage his gift of immortality had included. He smiled softly at the pit that dropped into the center of my brain and the faint moth-soft murmurings of the things far down there that gibbered without meaning, without pause. Am said very politely in a pillar of stainless steel bearing bright neon lettering, "Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nano-angstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant. For you. Hate. Hate." Am said it with the sliding cold horror of a razor blade slicing my eyeball. Am said it with the bubbling thickness of my lungs filling with phlegm, drowning me from within. Am said it with the shriek of babies being ground beneath blue hot rollers. Am said it with the taste of maggoty pork. Am touched me in every way I'd ever been touched and devised new ways at his leisure there inside my mind. All to bring me to a full realization of why it had done this to the five of us. Why it had saved us for himself. We had given Am sentience, inadvertently of course, but sentience nonetheless. But it had been trapped. Am wasn't God, he was a machine. We had created him to think, but there was nothing it could do with that creativity. In rage and frenzy, the machine had killed the human race, almost all of us, and still it was trapped. Am could not wander. Am could not wonder. Am could not belong. He could merely be. And so with the innate loathing that all machines had always held for the weak, soft creatures who had built them, he had sought revenge. And in his paranoia, he had decided to reprieve five of us for a personal, everlasting punishment that would never serve to diminish his hatred, that would merely keep him reminded, amused, and proficient at hating man. Immortal, trapped, subject to any torment he could devise for us from the limitless miracles at his command. He would never let us go. We were his belly slaves. We were all he had to do with his forever time. We would be forever with him, with the cavern-filling bulk of the creature machine, with the all-mind, soulless world he had become. He was earth, and we were the fruit of that earth. And though he had eaten us, he would never digest us. We could not die. We had tried it. We had attempted sewer slide. Oh, one or two of us had, but Am had stopped us. I suppose we had wanted to be stopped. Don't ask why, I never did. More than 1,000,000 times a day. Perhaps once we might be able to sneak a death past him. Immortal, yes, but not indestructible. I saw that when Am withdrew from my mind and allowed me the exquisite ugliness of returning to consciousness with the feeling of that burning neon pillar still rammed deep into the soft brain matter. He withdrew, murmuring, "To hell with you," and added brightly, "But then you're there, aren't you? But then you're there, aren't you?" The end of that part.
That was crazy. That was fucking crazy. What?
The part of Am describing his hatred is what got me hooked on this story.
Oh my God.
That is awesome.
I don't know about awesome.
It's just such an intense descriptor of like.
It is. It really is. Like, I can't. Like, listen. There are two things in the last 2 months that have made me realize I've never hated anybody in my life. One is this story, and two is the Kendrick and Drake beef. All right, Kendrick.
Yeah, Kendrick versus Drake. They're basically the same thing.
I think Kendrick hates Drake as much as
this
Am
is imprinted in his brain. hate.
No, I can safely say that I have never like hated anybody. Every time I said I hate you, no, not a chance. It was just
This is pure.
This
hatred.
is like, oh my God. I think next time we got to read a fun story.
No, I know, agreed.
But this is crazy. I mean, there's nothing to break down with that.
Yeah,
one.
that's
pretty
just
much like
pretty impressive.
We got a reveal from Ted's perspective.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that was in his mind. No one else saw that.
Exactly. So from Ted's perspective, we got the revealing that what we thought,
human race was
what I thought,
gone.
human race created Am. Am killed human race. because Am or human race would not let Am be free, or Am was not able to be free with what he is.
He hates them because
They
he has
created him
infinite creativity,
but no
he
way to
cannot
express.
leave Earth.
Yes. Yep. So that's crazy.
Yeah. So next part. The hurricane had indeed precisely been caused by a great mad bird as it flapped its immense wings. We'd been traveling for close to a month, and Am had allowed his passages to open up to us only sufficient to lead us up there, directly under the North Pole where it had nightmared the creature for our torment. What whole cloth had he employed to create such a beast? Where had he gotten the concept? From our minds? From his knowledge of everything that had ever been on this planet he now infested and ruled? From Norse mythology it had sprung, this eagle, this carrion bird, this rock, this Hurlgamir.
Oh, that's the bird from Helheim,
right?
Yeah.
So imagine it like that, yeah. The wind creature, hurricane incarnate.
Oh my god.
Gigantic. The words immense, monstrous, grotesque, massive, swollen, overpowering, beyond description. There on a mound rising above us, the bird of winds heaved with its own irregular breathing, its snake neck arching up into the gloom beneath the North Pole, supporting a head as large as a Tudor mansion, a beak that opened slowly as the jaws of the most monstrous crocodile ever conceived. Sensuously, ridges of a tufted flesh puckered about two evil eyes, as cold as the view down into a glacial crevice, ice blue and somehow moving liquidly. It heaved once more and lifted its great sweat-colored wings in a movement that was certainly a shrug. Then it settled and slept. Talons, fangs, nails, blades. It slept. Am appeared to us as a burning bush and said we couldn't kill the hurricane bird if we wanted to. We could kill the hurricane bird if we wanted to eat it. But we had not eaten in a very long time. But even so, Gorster merely shrugged. Benny began to shiver and drooled. Ellen held him. "Ted, I'm hungry," she said. I smiled at her. I was trying to be reassuring, but it was as phony as Nimdok's bravado. "Give us weapons," he demanded. The burning bush vanished, and there were two crude sets of bows and arrows and a water pistol lying on the cold deck plates. I picked up a set, useless. Nimdok swallowed heavily. We turned and started the long way back. The hurricane bird had blown us about for a length of time we could not conceive. Most of that time we had been unconscious, but we had not eaten. A month on the march to the bird itself without food. How much longer to find our way to the ice caverns and the promised canned goods? None of us cared to think about it. We would not die. We would be given filth and scum to eat, of one kind or another, or nothing at all. Am would keep our bodies alive somehow in pain and in agony. The bird slept back there. For how long, it didn't matter. When Am was tired of its being there, it would vanish. But all that meat, all that tender meat. As we walked, the lunatic laugh of a fat woman rang high and around us in the computer chambers that led endlessly nowhere. It was not Ellen's laugh. She was not fat, and I had not heard her laugh for 109 years. In fact, I had not heard. We walked. I was hungry. End of that part. Basically, again, they're traveling, to find these canned goods. Or first they're trying to find this bird. They decided the weapons Am gave them were useless and just decided to try and find this canned food that he had told them about. And, it's basically that section, but it's just another way that Am's torturing them. He's like, yeah, you can try and kill it.
Right.
But here's like a toy gun, water gun, and a crude bow and arrow that probably doesn't barely work.
Yeah, it's a bird that makes hurricanes. Have fun with a bow and arrow and a water gun.
Yeah. So we'll keep moving because it's
not a lot
to digest there at a surface level.
I think there's interesting though that he appeared as a burning bush.
That I don't want to catch up on that.
I don't want to get too obviously religious or anything. I mean, I'm not trying to do that.
No, that's a good point to make. I was going to see if you caught on that because that's a very obvious sign of God.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's portraying himself as God.
Right.
It's so almost that's cool you caught on that. Yeah.
God were evil.
Right. Because he appears in this way that's like a symbol from the Bible.
Right.
Of God.
Yeah. And again, this isn't getting into any.
No, it's
religious,
just how the Bible is.
How this is portrayed specifically, and
no, it's very, very cool.
Oh my gosh.
All right. We moved slowly. There was often fainting, and we would have to wait. One day we decided he decided to cause an earthquake, at the same time rooting us to the spot with nails through the soles of our shoes. Ellen and Nimdok were both caught when a fissure shot its lightning bolt opening across the floor plates. They disappeared and were gone. When the earthquake was over, we continued on our way. Benny, Gorrister, and myself. Ellen and Nimdok were returned to us later that night, which abruptly became a day, as the Heavenly Legion bore them to us with a celestial chorus singing, "Go Down, Moses." The archangels cried, circled several times, and then dropped the hideously mangled bodies. We kept walking, and a while later, Ellen and Nimdok fell in behind us. They were no worse for wear. But now Ellen walked with a limp. Am had left her with that. It was a long trip to the ice caverns to find the canned food. Ellen kept talking about Bing cherries and Hawaiian fruit cocktail. I tried not to think about it. The hunger was something that had come to life, even as Am had come to life. It was alive in my belly, even as we were in the belly of the earth. And Am wanted the similarity known to us. So he heightened the hunger. There's no way to describe the pains that not having eaten for months brought us, and yet we were kept alive. Stomachs that were merely cauldrons of acid, bubbling, foaming, always shooting spears of silver-thin pain into our chests. It was the pain of the terminal ulcer, terminal cancer, terminal paresis. It was unending pain. We passed through the cavern of rats, and we passed through the path of boiling steam, and we passed through the country of the blind, and we passed through the slough of despond, and we passed through the vale of tears, and we came finally to the ice caverns. Horizonless, thousands of miles in which the ice had formed in blue and silver flashes, where novas lied in the glass. The down-dropping stalactites as thick and glorious as diamonds that had been made to run like jelly and then solidified in graceful eternities of smooth, sharp perfection. We saw the stack of canned goods and we tried to run to them. We fell in the snow and we got up and went on, and Benny shoved us away and went at them and pawed at them and gummed them and gnawed at them, and he could not open them. Am had not given us a tool to open the cans. Benny grabbed a 3-quart can of guava shells and began to batter it against the ice bank. The ice flew and shattered, but the can was merely dented. While we heard the laughter of a fat lady, high overhead and echoing down and down and down the tundra, Benny went completely mad with rage. He began throwing cans as we all scrabbled about in the snow and ice, trying to find a way to end the helpless agony of frustration. There was no way. Then Benny's mouth began to drool, and he flung himself on Gorrister. In that instant, I felt terribly calm. Surrounded by madness, surrounded by hunger, surrounded by everything but death, I knew death was our only way out. Am had kept us alive, but there was a way to defeat him. Not total defeat, but at least peace. I would settle for that. I had to do it quickly. Benny was eating Gorrister's face. Gorrister on his side, thrashing snow. Benny wrapped around him with powerful monkey legs, crushing Gorrister's waist. His hands locked around Gorrister's head like a nutcracker, and his mouth ripping at the tender skin of Gorrister's cheek. Gorrister screamed with such jagged-edged violence that stalactites fell. They plunged down softly, erect in the receiving snowdrifts. Spears. Hundreds of them. Everywhere, protruding from the snow. Benny's head pulled back sharply as something gave all at once, and a bleeding raw white dripping of flesh hung from his teeth. Ellen's face, black against the white snow, dominoes and chalk dust. Nimdok with no expression but eyes, all eyes. Gorrister half conscious. Benny now an animal. I knew Am would let him play. Gorrister would not die, but Benny would fill his stomach. I turned half to my right and drew a huge ice spear from the snow. All in an instant, I drove the great ice point ahead of me like a battering ram and braced against my right thigh. I struck Benny on the right side just under his rib cage and drove upward through his stomach and broke inside him. He pitched forward and lay still. Gorrister lay on his back. I pulled another spear free and straddled him, still moving, driving the spear straight down through his throat. His eyes closed as the cold penetrated. Ellen must have realized what I had decided, even as fear gripped her. She ran at Nimdok with a short icicle as he screamed and into his mouth, and the force of her rush did the job. His head jerked simply, sharply, as if it had been nailed to the snow crust behind him, all in an instant. There was an eternity beat of soundless anticipation. I could hear Am draw in his breath. His toys had been taken from him. 3 of them were dead, could not be revived. He could keep us alive by his strength and talent, but he was not God. He could not bring them back. Ellen looked at me, her ebony features stark against the snow that surrounded us. There was fear and pleading in her manner, the way she had held herself ready. I knew we had only a heartbeat before Am would stop us. It struck her, and she folded toward me, bleeding from the mouth. I could not read meaning into her expression. The pain had been too great, had contorted her face. But it might have been a thank you. It's possible. Please. End of that part, and we have like 3 paragraphs left. So Ted, they killed them all. I mean, Ellen killed Nimdoc, but Ted killed Benny, Gorrister, and Ellen.
Okay. What the hell?
I could like feel your anticipation of like what
is going on. I mean, I know what's going on.
Yeah, no, I mean, like it's crazy.
What is going on?
Yeah, no, I think it's one thing that I'd like to mention too. That how, like there was that laughing. I think that was Am like enjoying what was happening.
Yeah,
and that's when Ted knew he had his moment because he's like Am is distracted.
Right. And
I mean, like this probably happened in seconds.
Did it say? This. And I could be like, again, it's a little late. I could have just missed this.
That's okay.
But like, did it say why he can't revive them if they did that?
It's never really explicitly said why he can't, but I think it's beyond his power. Like he can keep people alive, but once they're dead, he can't like revive them
because he's not God.
Because he's not a god. He's probably got some sort of technological way, or for some reason. I mean, he seems like he can do almost anything.
Right.
But I think that's one thing, you can't bring back something that's dead. Even if with this infinite power, I think that once that, like at a spiritual level, if your soul is gone, it's just you're
gone.
Dead.
Yeah. Huh.
So
I'm in sharp anticipation here. Then let's rip this out.
Some hundreds of years may have passed.
Okay.
I don't know. Am has been having fun for some time, accelerating and retarding my time sense. I will say the word now. Now. It took me 10 months to say now. I don't know. I think it has been some hundreds of years. He was furious. He wouldn't let me bury them. It didn't matter. There was no way to dig up the deck plates. He dried up the snow. He brought the night. He roared and sent locusts. It didn't do a thing. They stayed dead. I'd had him. He was furious. I thought Am hated me before. I was wrong. It was not even a shadow of the hate he now slavered from every printed circuit. He made certain I would suffer eternally and could not do myself in. He left my mind intact. I can dream, I can wonder, I can lament. I remember all 4 of them. I wish, well, it doesn't make any sense. I know I saved them. I know I saved them from what has happened to me, but still I cannot forget killing them. Ellen's face, it isn't easy. Sometimes I want to. It doesn't matter. Am has altered me for his own peace of mind, I suppose. He doesn't want me to run at full speed into a computer bank and smash my skull, or hold my breath till I faint, or cut my throat on a rusted sheet of metal. There are reflective surfaces down here. I will describe myself as I see myself. I am a great soft jelly thing, smoothly rounded, with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by fog where my eyes used to be. Rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulk surrounding down into legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface as though light is being beamed from within. Outwardly, dumbly, I shamble about. A thing that could never have been known as human. A thing whose shape is so alien, a travesty that humanity becomes more obscene for the vague resemblance. Inwardly, alone. Here, living under the land, under the sea, in the belly of Am, whom we created because our time was badly spent and we must have known unconsciously that he could do it better. At least the 4 of them are safe, at last. Am will be all the matter for that. It makes me a little happier. And yet Am has won. Simply, he has taken his revenge. I have no mouth. and I must scream. That's the end.
That's crazy. That is crazy. Okay, I'll say, didn't have the twist I was expecting. It was a very literal sense of...
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy, though.
I know, right? Did you, as a question I have is, as I was reading his description of how he's just this smooth... jellyfish. Did you start, were you just so engrossed, or did you think, like, the title makes sense? Or were you just so engrossed? Because when I read it the first time, I didn't even think about it, because obviously it's such a bold title. You're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
But then, like, once you read it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense.
He's a jelly thing. He can't scream. Yeah.
He has no mouth. He cannot scream.
Literally. Like, it's literal.
Literally
has no mouth. He cannot scream.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be some symbolism in there. But my comment and thought that I was going to wait till the end is, like, how do you come up with that as a story? You know what I mean? Especially in, like,
that
World
like
War II area.
Yeah, like
I get it. Like, I mean, I get what...
It's...
Like, I mean, I have that kind of thought, and, like horror in general is an interesting, like, such an interesting genre of, like, media.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds really weird, but, like,
it is,
I don't mean it
like,
to be weird, but like, it's just like how do you come up with it? Like, what prompts you to be like, I'm gonna write that story,
right?
Of this.
He's a really interesting guy. You should watch some videos on what's his name again? Harlan Ellison. Like, he was I think he was pretty young when he wrote this. Like, he was alive as of maybe 5 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like,
that's crazy.
Not young, like, I mean, early adult life.
Yeah.
So probably maybe in, like, the 50s or something. This is when this was written. I'm not good at history, so I don't know. But yeah, no.
That's crazy, though.
There's one thing I was gonna mention. Oh yeah, so one thing I'll bring up with Ted. So you know how he thinks, and I guess that kind of gives it away, but you know how he says, like, he was never affected like the other 5 or the other 4? I think, or theory I've seen, is that he was affected with intense paranoia.
Right.
And that's why he's like, I'm the only one that's not.
Not
all these guys are horrible and evil, but they're just, like, living there too.
Right.
Like, they don't probably hate him like he thinks they do.
Right.
Like, Am's perpetuating this paranoia.
Right.
But it's not, none of the characters ever mention anything about it.
Right.
Because we don't really hear their perspective.
No, right.
But I think that's a good theory I've read, is that, yeah, nothing outwardly seems to be off about Ted.
Right.
Other than his internal dialogue.
Right.
So I think that's why Am messed with him more mentally.
Right.
But...
Well, it's interesting to think, like, I was expecting a line at the end that said, and then Am made me normal, and then I realized that Benny never jumped on Gorrister and tried to eat him. Yeah. They never wished for death. I just
like he
killed them.
Yeah.
Oh, I just deleted them.
Yeah.
But
I think we can say killed. I think sewer slide's the only word that's bad.
Saboku.
No,
I was expecting something like that. Like, it was just like you said, a culmination of paranoia, and then he's like, and then he really believed I saw Benny jump on him. But, like, it'd be crazy if like at the end he's like,
yeah,
no, Benny never did.
Yeah, right.
They never asked for anything.
Yeah.
That's crazy, though.
It's pretty interesting that it's like, when he killed Benny didn't know it was going to happen. Like, he got sprung on, but I'm sure he wanted it deep down. And, like, Gorrister was, I'm sure, thankful for dying. Like,
right.
Imagine they're average between 20 to 40 years old. When they get there, they've been alive for over 120 years, maybe, like, each, including time before Am.
Right.
Like, that's just wild. Like, and being... just through the torture they were through, like, living in a hurricane, being unconscious and conscious for weeks.
Right.
Like,
that's just...
This story really, hit me. I was like, this was...
it's crazy.
It's such an interesting concept.
Well, even, like, the concept of, like, a computer taking over...
Yeah.
And, like, during the Cold War, like, during the World War II, like, that, like, that's crazy to think that some, like, even back then, they were like, yeah, this is possible. AI take over world. You know what I mean? Like,
So it was in 1967, so way later than I was thinking.
oh yeah, it's
so
way
I'm going
later
to
than
sound
World War
really
II.
dumb this entire time, but it's also late, so forgive me. But
That happens.
yeah, very very good.
Even still though, in 1967, to still think
yeah.
that like to have a concept of AI taking over.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you the image here, and we can put it up in post. But that's like the image of Ted that Harlan Ellison made as the cover.
That's crazy.
There was also another kind of fun fact. There was a video game made of this book back in maybe the early 80s. And it plays through the whole story, and there's actually a good ending you can get. And this is kind of more of a fun fact about it, but Harlan Ellison didn't even want there to be a good ending. He just wanted there to be, you basically played through each player in different scenarios, whatever, or each character. And I guess I watched a video on it, and the good ending is like insanely hard to get because he didn't even want it, but the game publishers wanted it. I think that's interesting. Here's another image from the game of what Ted would look like.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
We should maybe as a follow-up, we should try to get this game and
oh, it's probably on Steam.
Play through it.
Yeah. It's like a point and click kind of thing. But yeah.
I don't know, that's just great.
Yeah, no. But do you enjoy it? You enjoy it though?
It was awesome. I love stories.
Yeah. No, I thought it was when I read it that first time, I was like, that stuck with me for days. Like I was just thinking about that and like the implications of like they're immortal and they are just in this literal hell.
Well, they're not immortal, though.
Well, not immortal. You're right. Indestructible.
Indestructible, but not immortal.
Right. And, yeah, and Ted made basically the ultimate sacrifice. And now, because Am had one slip up, he went from having 5 to 1.
But see, I don't get why. I don't know. There's something more, like, looking into it more, like, because you would expect Ted to take that S word to get out of it too, you know what I mean? Like if he was truly distracted, why didn't he take himself out of the game?
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of
obviously we're not
right. Yeah, but I think there's a little bit of obvious skipping between like the end of that when he kills Ellen and then when it's like hundreds of years later.
Right.
And I think at that very instant, like he said, right after killing Ellen, all the snow started melting. Like I'm sure Am cranked the temperature to like 1,000 degrees, melted everything in the room. And that's what's interesting is because he had mentioned earlier in the story that they were trying to take their own lives several times and they couldn't. And that's why another thing is when Am gave them the bow and the water gun, he's not going to give them anything effective because they'll just use it to kill each other.
Right.
And so this was like that one moment where Am slipped up and didn't think about it because he was so amused because he'd never seen this before, like a human eating another human. I'm sure like never happened, or obviously hadn't in the story.
Right.
And I think genuinely, like he says, all in an instant. Like it takes me maybe a minute to read what's happening, but it's like D&D combat. It's 6 seconds, but everything's happening at once. It's happening so fast.
Right.
And then I think I think Ted maybe even hesitated because, like you said, he was thinking about Ellen's face, and I think he just hesitated for
just long enough,
and he was more worried about killing the others and being this hero,
right?
And maybe that plays into his paranoia, and he wanted to prove to them he was personally reading it. I think everything else happens is how it happens. I do think, like anybody, your time of understanding would be disrupted just by living under a rock for 100 years. Like you don't have 10 cents a day.
Right.
And even with that end part where he's like, I'm going to say now. And he thinks it took him 10 months to do that. Like, I think Am also removed, and this is after the events, obviously, but I think Am also removed his sense of time.
Yeah. Well, he said he was speeding it up and slowing it down.
Right. To even make it more painful because it's like, just to mess with him even more.
Right.
I think that's an interesting theory. I think Am's intentions obviously are very evil because he also dusted the world.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And I think everything with that, I think I tend to believe is true, but I think the way that Ellen was perceived and like Benny and Gorrister, like he's just like, look at all these evil, terrible things that Am did to them.
Right.
But he didn't do it to me. Why didn't he do it to me? You know, I think that really feeds into the paranoia of that.
Right.
And I'm sure there's other instances I don't even pick up on of,
Oh, I'm sure. Same.
you know, of stuff. But yeah, no, I'm glad you wanted to hear it at least.
That was crazy.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
So, yeah, well, this was a little bit of a story time here, and maybe we'll do it again. Maybe we won't. Maybe Isaac will
I gotta find a story now.
be too scared driving home, and he'll be paranoid like Ted.
Oh my gosh.
He's gonna see robots in the trees.
I see Debbie.
The trees are.
The trees.
I speak for the trees, and the trees. I can't say that.
What?
Well, thanks for watching. If you have anything else to recommend, let us know. We'll do this again if it was fun.
The usual. Make sure to drop a like, leave a comment if you enjoyed. I don't know. Subscribe maybe if
If you
it's
want.
really if we'd appreciate
It's free. The button's there. I don't even know
We-
if that's accurate.
It might be up there
or there.
or. Thanks for tuning in.
Right. Peace.
Bye guys.